Good morning. I'd like to make a comment on a few things. I'll start with the Immigration Minister's appearance at last night's Committee of the Whole. There were a few concerning lapses of judgment I think she made in her answers, as well as lack of information. So first of all, we still have questions after questioning her last night about whether the government believes that the measures, particularly the immigration measures that they're undertaking, will be sufficient to prevent Ebola from entering and spreading in Canada as the FIFA World Cup approaches. I'm also concerned that she didn't have a more cogent response on committing to more autonomy for provinces over immigration powers. As well, she would not confirm that she would abolish the TFW program. Particularly, we also asked her if she would stop issuing permits for Tim Hortons. We had several questions last night on Liberal Bill C3, the Citizenship by Descent bill. Interestingly, she would not stand by her initial estimate of 5,000 people being granted Canadian citizenship yearly, particularly in light of the CBC reporting that millions of Americans are now eligible for Canadian citizenship. She admitted last night that there are 17,000 people in Canada who are being investigated for ties to the Iranian regime, and also had several bizarre comments on the interim federal health program. But I think the thing that stuck out most to me last night was, even when presented with dozens of cases of non-citizens being given leniency after being convicted of serious crimes in sentencing in order to avoid deportation, she expressed no willingness to change the situation. This was particularly stunning in light of a case of a constituent of my colleague MP Kelly DeRitter. This case involved a non-citizen being convicted of choking his partner and then being allowed to stay in Canada. And this victim now has to live in a women's shelter due to him repeatedly breaching probation. So we need some answers and action on that. I also want to speak briefly to this morning's numbers or recessionary data that just came out, specifically with regard to immigration. So we know that the Liberals let too many people into the country too fast for housing, healthcare, and jobs to keep up. And we know that this created a youth jobs crisis and labour market distortions, wage distortions across the economy. I think that the data today, the recessionary data today, shows that this immigration shell game, which essentially was that this mass immigration was masking underlying economic weakness, that shell game is over today. There's some particular stats that I think are important. Population growth has outpaced economic output for a long period of time in Canada, and that has created a misleading picture of economic strength. Record immigration may have driven Canada's total GDP higher, but real GDP per capita has declined in the last 5 or 6 quarters. So today, I think what needs to be just reemphasized is that Canada is the only G7 country that's in a recession right now, and there have been structural issues related to the Liberals' anti-development policies, inflationary deficit spending, and more. And that doesn't bode well for the economy or anybody who is now residing in Canada. So, while high immigration may have created short-term GDP boosts and labour market padding, it has also led to rising unemployment among newcomers, housing and infrastructure strain, and per capita stagnation, things that will only get worse now that we have this official recession data. Thank you. My colleague Gabriel.
Oui, il faut le monter un peu. Merci. Écoutez, ça a été une très grosse rencontre hier avec la ministre de l'Immigration, puis j'en ai pris quelques notes que je crois qui sont importantes de souligner aujourd'hui. Premièrement, ça a été une démonstration à quel point les libéraux ont complètement abandonné leur devoir de bien gérer le système de l'immigration et notamment de protéger la langue française. Hier, j'ai demandé à la ministre est-ce qu'elle reconnaissait le déclin du français Et dans un moment d'hésitation, alors qu'elle ne savait pas trop quoi répondre, j'ai entendu ses collègues autour lui dire « Il n'y a aucune preuve, il n'y a aucune preuve de ça ». Donc la réponse a été qu'il n'y avait pas de preuve du déclin du français au Québec, ce qui est une grave erreur parce que je lui ai rappelé qu'on le voyait notamment dans la presse, dans les articles de Radio-Canada. On prévoit 10 de taux de francophones comme langue maternelle, une diminution de 10 de la langue maternelle francophone au Québec d'ici 2036. Dans le Devoir notamment, elle a refusé de reconnaître que c'était un fait en me disant qu'il n'y avait aucune évidence. Ensuite de ça, quand je lui ai parlé que seulement 58 des Montréalais utilisent le français comme langue usuelle, sa réponse a été qu'elle aimait beaucoup le français et que c'était une langue très importante pour elle. Ensuite de ça, je lui ai parlé du programme de santé intérimaire qui passe de 211 millions de dollars à 1,5 milliard de dollars en moins de 10 ans. Alors, je lui ai demandé est-ce que c'était normal que des non-résidents, des demandeurs d'asile aient accès à plus de services de santé que les payeurs de taxes, que nos citoyens. Encore une fois, la réponse a été très évasive. Je lui ai demandé pour les garderies à 10 que la Cour suprême a forcé le Québec à ouvrir ses garderies à 10 pour des demandeurs d'asile, alors qu'il y a des Québécois qui n'ont même pas accès à ce service-là. Elle m'a dit qu'elle n'avait pas compris la question. Alors, ça a été un constat d'échec hier, de respect de la capacité d'accueil du Québec en immigration. Et souvent même, elle m'a dit que dans le fond, c'était à Québec de décider et que c'est à Québec de prendre le contrôle, alors qu'on sait très bien que les libéraux ont utilisé un programme qui était le programme de mobilité internationale pour augmenter les seuils d'immigration sans respecter l'accord Canada-Québec. Et sa réponse a été que c'était au Québec, finalement, de se gérer. Alors voilà, moi je pense que hier, ça a été, ma dernière question en fait a même été sur la vision d'un État post-national, d'un Canada qui n'a pas d'identité, pas d'histoire, pas de culture. Puis c'est les mêmes ministres, c'est toute la même gang qui est encore là. Et elle m'a juste répondu qu'elle aimait ça, venir visiter le Québec. Donc hier, ça a été un constat d'échec. Pour moi, c'est une ministre qui ne contrôle pas l'immigration, qui essaie de pallier ou de se rattraper. Puis ça a été une rencontre qui a été, je crois, très révélatrice sur le manque de contrôle des libéraux par rapport à l'immigration, mais surtout sur le constat de leur idéologie qui ne fonctionne pas après près de 11 ans. Et là, les constats, les résultats arrivent, puis ils essayent de pallier ou ils essayent juste de mettre de la poudre aux yeux pour dire qu'ils ont le contrôle alors qu'ils ont complètement brisé le système. Voilà. Merci.
The Canada is in technical recession. Is it Donald Trump's fault or Mark Carney's fault?
Well, we've had data which have shown that Canada's economy has been faltering for some time, and that's because of some of the elements that I talked about earlier. We've had anti-development laws from the Liberal government, which are still in place under Mark Carney, like Bill C-69, Bill C-48, the No More Pipelines Bill, the anti-tanker bill. This has chased away investment from Canada. Also, I talked about how a lot of Liberal policies have lowered productivity in Canada. The other thing I'll say is that the Liberals' decade of inflationary spending has created economic impacts which have, I would say, stalled economic growth. And again, I'll just reemphasize, we are the only country that's in G7 country that's in a recession right now. The Liberals have refused for a long time to undertake policies which would create an environment for investment stability. I think about the industrial carbon tax. I think about the fact that, again, Bill C-69 is still in place. And again, I want to also outline something else. If oil prices weren't high right now, right, the numbers would be even worse. So we have to look internally as a country, and the reality is that Mark Carney's been the prime minister for a year. Many of the bills that have led to economic stagnation, like when you think about, for example, per capita GDP growth in 2015 was higher, and it was matching under peer countries like the United States. Now there's a big delta between us and the U.S. I mean, Mark Carney's been here for a year. And I think that there's a lot of elements of investment instability that his government, he personally is presiding over, and he needs to be held accountable for that. Thank you.
You mentioned the immigration shell game is over with respect to the idea of, juicing GDP numbers with temporary residents. But as you mentioned, we still have a lot of temporary people here in Canada. What do you think the actual GDP figures may actually look like?
It's a good question. I would point first to the youth jobs crisis and the elimination of a lot of entry-level jobs in Canada, particularly in white-collar jobs. There are more and more people who are becoming unemployed every month, and the reality is that the Liberals are still issuing, I think this year it's 215,000 new temporary foreign work permits plus foreign student permits, which include the ability to work. So that is a number that Canadians should be concerned with. It's certainly something I'll be monitoring closely, but again, this is why Conservatives have been for the last since the fall, calling for the abolishment of the temporary foreign worker program, replacing it with a standalone program for legitimately hard-to-fill agricultural labor, because we saw this problem coming. I think last night in the House of Commons, we asked the minister many questions directly related to what you were talking about, and there was almost no acknowledgement of that fact. So again, I would just re-up calls for the government to abolish the temporary foreign worker program, replace it with the program I just mentioned, and to be cognizant of the fact that the policies that they would put in place have stalled the economy, and that means bad news for Canadian workers, people who are worried about job security, and particularly youth who are in a jobs crisis right now.
We've got the Prime Minister, constantly going overseas trying to sell Canada as this investment hub. At the same time, they don't seem to be paying that much attention to this file. Do you think there's a kind of misunderstanding on, how do I put this? Do you think they're essentially trying to keep going with business as usual with the temporary foreign worker program in the hopes that these trade deals might get us back to a point where that might cover for what's going on with immigration?
Well, again, it's a good question, but we've seen structural economic problems in the Canadian economy for a long period of time, and that's measured particularly by the per capita GDP figures that we've seen. There's been a precipitous decline in per capita GDP. We could also look at labor market productivity as well, too, right? That's declined on a per capita basis. So the question for me is really twofold. When I look at the ability of Canada's economy to attract job-creating investment in the long term, unnecessary regulation like Bill C-69, inflationary spending, that creates problems for stability, for long-term investment, long-term economic growth. Then to your question, the government is continuing to bring in high numbers of temporary foreign workers through various programs. So those two things don't jive. If you're seeing a long-term decrease in economic growth and you keep bringing in more people, simply put, it's too many people too fast for the economy to create jobs. And so your question about does the government care about the immigration file, I think Mark Carney doesn't care about the immigration file. I think it's why evidence of that is he's got a very weak minister. It's something that, I'm not just saying this, people with liberal leanings are saying this on political shows. And, whenever we have her at committee, when she says things like, why would I consult the provinces on healthcare capacity? It's like there's a disconnect between setting immigration levels and the type of people that we're like, and by that I mean, high-skilled economic workers versus a flood of low-skilled migrants through various streams. I think that there's a disconnect there, and it's something I don't think that the minister is capable of wrapping her head around, frankly. And so this is why Conservatives have called on the Prime Minister to take accountability for this file, to fire this incompetent minister, and to your point, take it seriously, because it has an impact on Canadian workers and job prospects. Thank you.